Hi, everyone. Welcome to PBWM Hot Seat, another episode. Today with us, we have Tina Freund, who's in Switzerland. She's been in 20 years in the industry across all lines of defense, and we're going to speak about one of my favorite topics, regulatory compliance and risk. Welcome, Tina. And just to get the ball rolling, what's on the cards for next year, 2025? What is a focus area? How do you see this space?
Thank you, Prasanna, and good to see you again, by the way. And thank you for having me today. And I think it's a very good question to start with. What is on the agenda of compliance officers and risk managers for next year? And I don't have my crystal ball with me, but I think there is nothing fundamental new. I think rather it will be a continuation of topics that we have seen this year, for example. So I think one area for sure will be regulatory change. So ensuring that new regulatory requirements are implemented in the organization. That will be a key topic. And also looking at the type of regulations, I think a lot of things will just continue here in Switzerland and in Europe. Give you one example, the entire operational risk and resilience area has kept banks quite busy last year and this year, and we expect that to continue next year. Similar climate risk management will be a key topic also for next year, what we expect. And of course, last but not least, we can also expect updated or additional requirements in the anti-money laundering space. In Switzerland, as well as from the European Union, with their new anti-money laundering regulatory package. So I think on the regulatory side, quite a lot of things continuing and coming in next year that will keep compliance and non-financial risk departments busy. And then I think a second topic, also not new to this year, is technology and how technology can be leveraged in compliance and non-financial risk management. And there we hear quite some interest from our clients on artificial intelligence, both the opportunities as well as the risks related to that. And probably a third area, I would say, is also nothing new, but are questions around the operating model in compliance. So a continuing discussion is how to become more efficient, leaner, reduce the cost in compliance. But I would also say the question, what is an effective delineation between the lines of defense from a compliance perspective? So I think nothing fundamental new, but quite a lot of topics. So I think 2025 will continue to be a challenging year for the banks when you look at compliance and non-financial risk in Switzerland and the European Union. But Prasanna, let me know from a global perspective, what do you see to be the topics on the agenda in that area?
Good question. I think I could draw a lot of parallels to the topics that you mentioned, but the ones probably that we didn't touch upon explicitly, which has also taken a center stage in Asia, is online fraud scams as an area. It's not necessarily compliance-based, but from a risk standpoint, that has taken a lot of attention. The other one is around conduct, culture and conduct. I see this as taking the center stage slowly and steadily, because the number of products that are available to clients and the investments and the rise of wealth and just the sheer volume on the scale in which products are now sold or can be sold, culture and conduct is going to be a key topic going forward. And the biggest one right now in the radar from a regulatory scrutiny, for example, if I take focus of Singapore, is still anti-money laundering. Because of the large case that happened, that's going through a lot of scrutiny, and that's something that I would imagine is going to be one of the key focus areas for 2025. And it's also interesting that in the response that he gave, we already structured my questions. Hopefully we can speak about maybe regulations first, if that's okay. Then we go into maybe technology and then maybe operating model. Those probably are three interesting things that I picked up. So maybe if we can get started, if you're okay, with the regulatory, with the regulations itself. What are those? Which are the key ones? And maybe if you can shed some light on it.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do that. So as I mentioned, I think nothing completely new, but for sure a continuation of new regulatory requirements next year. I think where we saw a lot of projects already last year and this year in Switzerland and Europe was on the operational risk and resilience side. Here, 2 years ago, we received new guidance, a circular from FINMA outlining the standards, the expectations from the regulator in that space, and introducing quite some new requirements. And of course, operational risk management is something that banks had in place before, right, including the business continuity management and the likes. However, I think the requirements that are articulated in that guidance go beyond of what many banks have introduced. And just to maybe give you one example, I think everyone has something like defined risk appetite statements and has put in place reporting against risk appetite statements, but everything very manual and ad hoc. And I think with the new requirements, the expectation is rather to establish a continuous monitoring of your different operational risks, which poses questions on the data availability, right? So risk metrics, control performance metrics, and the like. So just to give you one example. Similar, I think, how banks have looked at it in the past was probably at the different operational risk frameworks, slightly separated, and some of them have rather operated them in silos. And what is coming in has to be implemented in 2026 is you need to have a more integrated framework between the IT risk, the data risk, the vendor risk, third-party risk management, and the likes, which makes perfect sense, of course. But I think here, these are just examples where more work is coming than to achieve full compliance. Similar, you might have heard about DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act in the European Union. It's a huge new regulation across similar fields. I would say it goes beyond FINMA guidance, FINMA regulations, and it heavily impacts our clients in Liechtenstein, for example, and of course also in other European countries, but it also impacts the Swiss banks, right? So many Swiss banks actually have subsidiaries in the European Union, and these subsidiaries receive services from the headquarters in Switzerland, and so they are fully impacted by the third-party service provider requirements. And what we are hearing from our clients is that there are still areas where they are underway with implementing those requirements. So existing regulation, however, I think more to do in that area. And then there are changes to the AML world. There is a new European AML regulatory package being prepared, which is huge and introduces new requirements. But also in Switzerland, for example, Switzerland is introducing a beneficial owner register, which will have an impact on the client due diligence banks perform. The CDBs are under revision, so a lot of additional changes. And I could probably sit here and speak for the next hour about AML regulatory changes. What I propose, Prasanna, is as I think that banks will look into the AML changes probably later in 2025, we do another series of interviews. And then I speak only about AML, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We actually need a session, maybe even on AML, as you mentioned, because the case in Singapore was also super interesting, where the entry towards the financial system even happened on the retail banking side, where the due diligence side of things was the level is much lower. Then you gradually get upgraded to become a private banking client, but it doesn't mean that there is additional scrutiny. You're just upgrading tiers. And that somewhere has also trickled in with other banks. For example, they sometimes do, as a part of their risk assessment framework, if there is a client that's already onboarded on a bank, in a specific bank, there is a bit of an assumption on benchmarking that they can accept these clients within their risk appetite. So a lot of these things currently are undergoing scrutiny, and to me, probably sometime early next year, it'll be great to just have a dedicated episode to talk about financial crime. Thanks a lot. That's really great. One other area to watch, and from a regulatory landscape similar to Switzerland that you mentioned, is also ESG. There is also things that are planned to be coming out, especially in Singapore. And at the same time, crypto and areas around that is also an area to watch out for, because the governments are slightly starting to allow crypto trading for the retail clients, but there is so much education and so much still now still certain market structures, AML side of things, source of wealth, many things needs to be tightened, and that's also an interesting space that's evolving in from an overall standpoint. So now, moving that segue towards technology, because you touched on the topic around AI, technology, and also compliance or risk relay linked to that. Could you share a bit more thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm happy to share some thoughts on that, although I'm not a technology person, as you know, but I think I can come in and have some thoughts on the regulatory and risk side, if that's okay. One sentence on crypto. I think that is also clients who have a crypto offering, they are also impacted by new regulation. It came in this year from the European Union, for example. If you offer crypto assets into Europe, there's a whole new regulatory regime with MiCA, it's called. And of course, also in Switzerland, all the existing regulations apply to crypto services, cryptocurrencies, which is, from a technology perspective, I think, quite a challenge to implement and meet all these requirements. Technology, I think technology has been, again, for years, a topic in compliance, in particular, the question how to automate compliance processes and controls. And I think that compliance departments have made huge progress in that area. Take the example of client lifecycle controls, right? So most banks have implemented workflow solutions in that space. What we hear, I think, currently more is, which is also not surprising because there's a lot of hype around that topic, is artificial intelligence. And here the question, how can we leverage those technology? How can we in compliance benefit from these technologies, and what are the risks around it? And I think that's the industry is probably at a rather early stage exploring those technologies. I think a couple of points to consider is, coming also back to the regulatory expectations, is if you move them out of a sandbox and apply them not only on an ad hoc basis, but for supporting you on a continuous basis doing control performance, then you need to consider model risk management requirements. So there's a clear expectation. So the European Union has just released the AI Act. There it's very explicit, but also FINMA has clearly articulated expectations in that space. That you do a risk assessment of your AI models, that you do a tiering. Depending on the risk, then that can trigger regular testing requirements. You need to document it, understand it, so all the likes, right? So that's an area you need to consider. And another example is, I think, where you then think about going one step further and you're looking into the question whether you can maybe replace existing solutions by such technologies, then you need to start from the beginning on to think about the question of whether you achieve and how to achieve a risk coverage which is at least as good as your more traditional system. And that's something to think about at very early stages and to agree on these kind of success or exit criteria for your more traditional system from the beginning, and also depending on what area it is, probably also involve the regulator. So just as a few examples, I think it's a fantastic technology with a lot of opportunities, but you need to get it right from the beginning on. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can invest and you get stuck, and you cannot use it then under your BAU compliance operations. Yeah.
So it's a lot of topics for next year. Looks to be quite action-packed. So thanks a lot, Tina. I'm sure we are going to produce more videos across some of these topics in the course of next year. Thanks a lot for your insights. Thanks for actually making it, and look forward to the next one. And potentially towards the audience, we already have 2 other things lined up. One on culture and conduct risk with Parsa, and the other one is on ESG risk management with Anu. So hopefully we can also publish those in the course of next year. Hopefully we also hear feedback from you on anything else that you want to hear about. Thanks a lot, and speak to you soon.